We thought that the democratic world order we built in the West would last forever. But since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we find ourselves at a crossroads in our history. While one autocratic superpower, Russia, shows its true dictatorial face, another superpower, China, is repositioning itself on the world stage.
中俄关系发展有着清晰的历史逻辑，具有强大的内生动力，两国人民的友谊坚如磐石，双方的合作前景十分广阔。
What will the world look like when not America, but China is the leading economic superpower? This is Backlight. Welcome to the world according to China.
Stel je voor, je bent het Chinese staatshoofd en je staat op het strand van China en je kijkt de oceaan op. Wat zie je dan? Dan zie je een heel benauwend beeld. Recht tegenover je zie je Taiwan, je ziet de Filipijnen daar, je ziet Japan daar. Je ziet eigenlijk gewoon een soort cordon om je heen, hè? Een omstrengeling eigenlijk. Het is voornamelijk psychologie. Wij zijn een wereldmacht. Dan moet je kijken, man. We zijn aan alle kanten zijn we gewoon ingesnoerd. En dat is eigenlijk vergelijkbaar met hoe het Russische staatshoofd naar het Westen kijkt. Die ziet ook een soort omsingeling. En dan zie je ook eigenlijk dat de Amerikaanse invloedssfeer de hele Pacific omvat. Tot en met Taiwan. Het is allemaal van Amerika als je vanuit de ogen van de Chinees bekijkt. Dus in die zin is de visie en het gevoel, die zijn wel begrijpelijk.
Unfortunately, we're headed towards the scenario that China has to fight for its place in the world. I think the West does not want to adjust for China's weight.
En vanuit Taiwan is het natuurlijk duidelijk. Die maken zich zorgen over het Amerikaanse antwoord op die Oekraïne-crisis. Die hebben daar inmiddels al enige ervaring mee.
相信的价值的话，那一定得面对可能的暴力，可能的战争。
Taiwan is following events in Ukraine with fear and trepidation.
因为咱看到，咱应该知影，咱即摆看到乌克兰，咱看到欧洲的战争，迄是共款，甲中国军队伫1947年的时阵，打入来咱台湾人的土地，屠杀咱台湾人。战场毋是上战场，战场就伫咱的街头，就伫咱的厝外口。一日吧，毋若是事件，中华民国甲咱教的，伊毋若是中国人甲咱屠杀。 中国军队甲咱屠杀，台湾人有反抗，台湾人这是一场台湾人战到当也未战衰的独立战争，这是台湾民族的革命。
Are you following the events in Ukraine?
当然，就是这几天，其实我完全。 你刚才看到我一直在那边看手机，就是我是在我就只要一停下来，我就会很想知道，又发生什么事，会觉得就是他会一直警告啊，说今天乌克兰，明天就是台湾，就是我们不应该去挑衅大的国家，这样子会造成我们的危险。
Taiwanese artist Shake feels personally invested in the war in Ukraine.
俄罗斯对乌克兰宣战的那一天就有9架中共的飞机飞来台湾，然后就更不用说，就是前一天，昨天中国已经宣布他要在南海演习3天，然后他们有故意释放那个就是气球。 到台湾的陆地的领空上面，然后那基本上是在定位，就是导弹可以射中的范围，射中的位置。那其实他其实是在做一个准备了。我觉得西方太天真了吧，就是中国跟 俄罗斯其实一直都在玩一种就是 double game 这种东西啊。然后我不知道在西方你们收到在从媒体上面看到的中国是什么样子，但是光这几天其实我自己看到的就是中国其实开始就是在做它的propaganda，就是对啊，就是比如说我有看到他们找俄罗斯的小女孩，大概可能18、19岁，然后拍 video， 然后应该是在那种 TikTok 上面发布，然后说就是他们俄罗斯并不怕西方的制裁，因为中国会帮助他们。
我们俄罗斯人和中国人两国是不好惹的，惹火了那也不是好办的，老子就是要开炮。
Less than 10 years ago, we thought China would concentrate on the West. To be rich is to be glorious, was the motto that then leader Deng Xiaoping used to announce the beginning of an era in which China developed a new form of state capitalism. The country slowly opened its borders to global trade, and Western businesses fell all over themselves to be the first to secure a position in this attractive growth market. It would only be a matter of time before China would join the Western world order.
Eigenlijk moeten we even terug. Zullen we even teruggaan? Ja.
Economy editor Martin Schinkel has studied China for years. In 2019, he traveled to Beijing and Shanghai for Backlight to see the Chinese growth model for himself.
Als je kijkt hoe de verhoudingen in de wereldeconomie zijn geweest sinds het begin der tijden, dan zijn China en daarna India eigenlijk altijd de grootste economieën geweest in de wereld. Tot rond 1800, kolonisatie door Europeanen, daarna de industriële revolutie, de opkomst van Amerika. Toen zijn ze die positie pas kwijtgeraakt. Dus die landen komen uit een enorme historische continuïteit en die zijn eigenlijk op zoek, zeker China, naar het innemen van wat zij zien als hun rechtmatige plaats in de wereldeconomie. Nou, dit is een grafiek over de verdeling van de wereldeconomie van het jaar 1 tot het jaar 2000 iets daarna. En dan zie je hoe lang het normaal is geweest, hoe lang India en China gewoon hun plek in de wereldeconomie innamen, hoe plotseling die schok is geweest. Wat je ziet is dat hier de eerste kolonisatiegolf begint, ook voor vanuit hun eigen gezichtspunt, hoe plotseling dat gegaan is en hoe volkomen vanzelfsprekend het voor hen is dat ze straks deze positie weer innemen. Zij zien natuurlijk gewoon die periode van, wat is het, 1,5 eeuw, als een aberratie. En we gaan nu weer terug naar normaal. En wat China betreft is dat ook in hoog tempo aan het gebeuren.
En hoe zien we dat?
Het deel van het wereldwijde bruto binnenlands product wat China voor zijn rekening neemt, dat is hard op weg. En ja, dat zal ergens in 2050 zover zijn. Hard op weg om gewoon weer het deel te hebben waar China meent recht op te hebben. Je ziet dat de bestaande macht Amerika een rivaal naast zich krijgt. En niet die rivaal op basis van de meeste kernkoppen. De Russische economie stelt niets voor. Die is even groot als België en Nederland samen. De Chinese economie daarentegen, die is waarschijnlijk ergens in 2030 al groter dan de Verenigde Staten in harde dollars gerekend. Dus op dat moment streeft China de Verenigde Staten ook voorbij. En dan heb je het over economische macht. En economische macht is veel belangrijker dan militaire macht. Want met economische macht kan je militaire macht natuurlijk heel makkelijk opbouwen. Als je daar aan vastkoppelt dat de grootste economie over het algemeen ook de grootste macht wordt in de wereld, dan zie je het gewoon voor je.
Most people in China believe that China needs to reassert its place in the world. It's sort of going back to where it was before.
According to financial economist Andy Xie, it's inevitable that China will become the greatest superpower again in a few years. From his hometown, Shanghai, he offers his outlook on how this'll happen.
I still remember a decade ago at a kind of a brainstorming seminar in the United States, a U.S. senator asked me when China's economy would be bigger than the U.S. At that time, I was more optimistic about China's economic policy, so I said 2022. And he was shocked. He thought it would take 100 years. And now, obviously, this year, China will not exceed the United States. Probably still would be like 10% or 15% smaller. But the issue is that why people in the United States were shocked that China's economy would be bigger than the U.S. economy. So they still believe that China should never be bigger than the U.S. Okay, so a lot of politicians talk that way. Even you look at what Trump said and what Biden is saying, that means conflict down the road.
Deze kaart kwam ik tegen in Indonesië, al heel lang geleden. In 1992 kwam ik hem tegen. En sindsdien hangt hij altijd op mijn werkplek. En dat is om me te herinneren dat de wereld echt anders is als je in Azië woont. Als je in Azië woont, dan is de Pacific het middelpunt van jouw wereld. Je ziet Taiwan hier liggen. Moet je kijken hoe centraal en strategisch dat eigenlijk ligt. Je ziet dit hele gebied, waar een ongelofelijke bevolkingsconcentratie plaatsvindt. Wat echt het nieuwe middelpunt wordt van de wereldeconomie. Indonesië, 200 miljoen inwoners, vergis je niet. India, 1,4 miljard inwoners. China, 1,4 miljard inwoners. Landen als Cambodja, Maleisië, Thailand. En als je ze allemaal bij elkaar optelt, dan heb je gewoon meer dan de helft van de wereldbevolking die gewoon op dit vierkantje hier woont. Het is het gebied waar het allemaal gaat gebeuren in de rest van deze eeuw. Kijk, wij zijn eraan gewend dat eigenlijk de Atlantische Oceaan in het midden ligt. En dan is het heel verhelderend om te zien wat er gebeurt als de Stille Oceaan in het midden ligt. En dat de landen die hem omcirkelen bezig zijn met de machtsstrijd om, zeg maar, de heerschappij, of in ieder geval een soort hegemonie in de wereldeconomie. En je ziet Europa hier liggen in een stukje periferie wat zo te zien eigenlijk helemaal niet ter zake doet. Dit is heel verhelderend en ja, af en toe dan kijk ik gewoon even om en dan realiseer ik me weer hoe de wereld in elkaar zit en hoe ik erover moet schrijven.
From Singapore, former UN diplomat Kishore Mahbubani watches the rising tensions between the two biggest economic players on the world stage.
Over this coming decade, US-China relations will progressively become more difficult. And for a very simple geopolitical law, okay? Whenever the world's #1 emerging power, which today is China, is about to overtake the world's #1 power, which today is United States will do its very best to stop China. So this is going to happen over the next 10 years. This is a given.
For years, the government of China has conducted illicit espionage to steal our industrial secrets, of which there are many. Today, I will issue a proclamation to better secure our nation's vital university research and to suspend the entry of certain foreign nationals from China who we have identified as potential security risks.
The mood in the United States is very anti-China, very anti-China. In fact, I was in the US in both October and December 2021, and I was personally shocked by how strong the anti-China sentiment has become in the American body politic.
China ripped off our prized intellectual property and trade secrets, causing millions of jobs all across America. It sucked supply chains away from America and then added a widget made of slave labor.
This is going to be them showing the world that they are the new superpower of the world. And you mark my words, after that Olympics, if everything goes smooth, they're going to take Taiwan. And when they take Taiwan, it's over.
But in this contest, I thought that most Americans would see China as a competitor. But more and more Americans now see China no longer as a competitor, but as an enemy. And if China becomes an enemy, then it's not a competitor. Then you try to destroy your enemy. You don't try to compete against your competitor. So there's a big difference between the two. And so that shift away from seeing China as a competitor towards seeing China as an enemy has made the situation between United States and China very dangerous.
A lot of Americans are saying is that they are saying that China should not be bigger than America. Why should Chinese productivity be less than like 1/4 of the U.S. productivity? Doesn't make sense. Chinese people are better educated than Americans on average, and Chinese people work harder. So why shouldn't China's economy be much, much bigger?
For the last 30 years, we have lived in an American world, a world structured and undergirded by American power. We are clearly moving out of that phase, and the phase we are moving into is a bipolar world.
Fareed Zakaria, one of the leading political commentators in the US, also sees how relations between America and China have flagged in recent years.
There's no question that the United States' fundamental attitude towards China has changed in the last few years. It has gone from, broadly speaking, being one of engagement to one of confrontation and competition. This has happened, I would argue, for two fundamental reasons. The first is that the United States has found that it faces a much greater degree of competition from China at every level than it experienced before. And you could look at it and say maybe the United States is very jealous of its position as the leading power in the world and does not want anything that encroaches on it, and that may well be part of it. But the second piece of this, which is important to note, is China has changed. Think about the two Olympics and the difference. So the 2008 Beijing Olympics, China was trying to present itself as the country long poor, long backward that had finally kind of made it and was part of the world, was integrated into the world, and much of the world celebrated it and celebrated it as a kind of return of China and Chinese power. And in the West, this was widely appreciated, the Beijing Olympics. George Bush went to the Beijing Olympics, the first American president to ever go to an Olympics in a foreign country. If you look at it today, the Beijing Olympics, the Winter Olympics, very few Western countries have sent heads of government or heads of state. The most important head of state is not the President of the United States visiting, but is the President of Russia.
Уважаемый председатель Си Цзиньпинь, дорогой друг, я очень рад вас видеть. Приветствую вас.
Putin was one of the only major world leaders showed up in the Beijing Winter Olympics. And right after the arrival, Chinese government and the Russian government, after meeting between Putin and Xi, signed over $100 billion worth of bilateral contracts. Foodstuff and energy and technology, lots of bilateral trade agreements.
As a student, Howard Zhang was present at Tiananmen Square when riots broke out there in 1989. They were violently crushed by the Chinese regime, and he fled to London. From there, he comments daily on the developments in China for the BBC.
Well, many has described the personal relationships between Xi Jinping and Putin as bromance, in a word of a brotherly romance. From all the evidence we can see, from the top of the government, people start to see what they call the long-term strategic rivalry set in motion. So how do you rival this number one in the world while you're number two? And it's to trying to get as many people as you can on your side. And Russia just somehow fits this criteria, because Russia's still got some military might. still got some scientific potential. And also Russia's got huge reserves of energy and one of the biggest food-producing countries on earth. And all of that, I guess, in the eyes of the Chinese strategic thinkers, would be a good compliment. And if you look at the map, if you have the world map opened up, you got the entire northern Eurasian continent dominated by Russia, and the entire East Asia dominated by China. And then if you throw in, Central Asian, West Asian countries such as Iran and North Korea, you almost have a giant northern bloc of autocratic ruling, and but commonly against what they call U.S. threat and U.S. values. It's almost a new, I wouldn't use the word axis, but some type of alliance by mutual needs.
China has gone from a rule-based dictatorship to a personality-based dictatorship. They had a strict rule, 2 terms for every leader, and that is broken now. We are back to what appears to be a leader for life.
Xi Jinping came into office with his China dream. That was his main theme coming in 2012, when he first nominated and eventually inaugurated as the chief of the Chinese Communist Party. And his China dream, for a while, for a few years, really, I think, had lots of support, because it's such a rosy and a really feel-good type of dream. Essentially will be the Chinese, what they call the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. After hundreds of years being subjugated and humiliated by world powers, China, this once great power in the world, finally, under the leadership of the Communist Party, have united itself, got its act together, developed its economy, and now we're en route to become a great power again. And under this new government, we will. And some of the famous sayings is you don't need to look up to the rest of the world anymore. You can look at them at your eyeline level. We're the same. And Mao gave China the new sort of independence, and Deng made China rich. Xi Jinping is making China strong. And those are the broad outline of this dream. They believe this way of strongman politics, a strong leader leading a strong state machine that manage a strong economy and then a strong military. And that vision, then you become a credible rival to US-led post-war system.
It does appear that the Chinese government is much more centralized today than it has been in the past, that the leadership by committee that characterized the era for the last 20 or 30 years is gone. It is all much more centralized in one man, Xi Jinping. And this has coincided with a much more aggressive attitude abroad, a much more repressive attitude at home, much greater government involvement in the economy. So you have to assume that it is all coming out of this one man's ideas and practices and policy. So it would seem logical to assume that Xi Jinping is the architect of all of this.
And is Taiwan part of Xi's vision for a greater China?
I think the way the Chinese government viewed Taiwan and dealt with it was, we believe that over time, the extraordinary absorptive power of the Chinese economy, which will be larger and larger and larger, will draw Taiwan in like a magnet. And there will be a kind of de facto reunification because we will all be one economy, we will be one culture, we will be one society. I think at some point in the last several years, the Chinese government has realized that their fundamental premise, their bet was that time was on their side. But maybe time is not on their side, because what has been happening in Taiwan is every year Taiwan becomes more distinct and different, and it becomes more sure of itself as a democracy. And its identity has become increasingly linked not just to its Chinese culture, but to its democratic culture. And that means it separates itself more and more from the mainland. And so I think Xi Jinping is looking at this and saying, maybe time is not on my side. Maybe 10 years from now, Taiwan will be more independence-minded, more fiercely independent. So maybe I have to act now.
现在的我会觉得我是100%的台湾人，对啊，我是在台湾长大，我认识的地理、认识的所有的东西，其实就是在台湾，然后那个连接是非常强。那这个东西并不是一个天生的东西，然后我想对很多，尤其是我这个年纪的台湾人，或者是比我再大一辈的，就是前几代的台湾人，其实都就是那个 identity， 那个身份认同的重新的建构，都是我们是需要重新建构的，那个不是一个天生的东西。我们从小被教育成我们是中国人。我小时候的对啊学的课本、学的历史、学的地理，我们要我们要知道中国的铁路，中国的哪边产什么东西啊，就是所有的一切都是认识中国，那个跟台湾一点关系都没有。所以你就会发现，那其实我以前认知的东西都是谎言的时候，那我自己是谁？
More and more people in Taiwan do not accept that they are Chinese, and I think the Chinese government will do everything to crush that. Make no mistake about it. Any part of China, if the people over there think they are not Chinese, this is going to lead to a huge response.
凡是数典忘祖、背叛祖国、分裂国家的人，从来没有好下场，必将遭到人民的唾弃和历史的审判。
And from China's perspective is that the people on Taiwan cannot decide their own fate, because China is one country, and it's just like in Catalonia cannot become an independent country, even though most people over there want to be an independent country. So I think that this is where there's some misunderstanding. They think that it's the wish of the people over there, and Beijing thinks this is happening because the West, especially the United States, is backing it. That's why the political changes are happening that way. And Beijing feels that Taiwan is slipping away.
If you want to become an independent country, it's not a unilateral decision you make. Your decision has to be accepted by the vast majority of countries in the world. And certainly you've got to be admitted to the United Nations as an independent country. Now, Taiwan has zero prospect of being admitted to the United Nations as an independent country because China has a veto in the UN Security Council that will block Taiwan from being admitted to the United Nations.
China has always had the goal of reunifying with Taiwan. That goal is in the 1949 Communist Party Constitution. So this is not a secret. What has changed is, I think, fundamentally this. Chinese military has gotten more and more modernized, sophisticated. And for the last 25 years, the goal of China's military modernization was first and foremost to be able to dominate that area, that region, and particularly to be able to take Taiwan quickly and effectively in a way that the United States would not be able to block that. China has always wanted to militarily be able to take Taiwan. It doesn't mean that it will, but it means that it is very important for China to be able to send that signal. We can take you militarily, and we can do it fast.
Some American military experts claim that China is ready to invade Taiwan within a year.
Well, I think China is ready to militarily capable of attacking Taiwan now. It's not a question of whether or not China can invade Taiwan. It can. I mean, and I suspect that if it's just a war between the forces in Taiwan and the forces in China, China's going to win. It's got overwhelming power already. But of course, the United States could also come in. And that's an open question. Because once you start a shooting war, it's very hard to stop it escalating to a nuclear war. And neither United States nor China, I think, want a nuclear war with each other. I mean, from the United States' point of view, the fundamental decision they have to ask is how many American cities does America want to sacrifice to fight a war across the Taiwan Straits?
I think the world should recognize that China will sacrifice a lot, more than any other country can imagine, just for taking back Taiwan. There's no way the West could win against China right next to China. It's not possible. So, because China can deploy all its resources so close to its shore. So for the countries from far away, how could they win? It's just not possible.
There are many ways in which China can put pressure on Taiwan. And one of the ways, of course, is to announce a naval blockade. And indeed, a former foreign minister of Taiwan, his name is Chen, I met him in Harvard in 1991. That's 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, he said to me, this is 30 years ago, when China was still not very strong. He said, Kishore, China doesn't have to declare war on Taiwan. China just has to announce that there'll be a naval blockade of Taiwan. And then, you know what he said? The insurance rates for shipping to Taiwan will rise. And when the insurance rate for shipping to Taiwan rise, people won't export to Taiwan, people won't import from Taiwan because it's too expensive.
Beijing may announce that all airplanes and ships going to Taiwan or leaving Taiwan to another country must come to the mainland first. Basically, they don't need to use warships, and they just tell the airlines and the shipping lines that your ships or your airplanes must dock on the mainland first for inspection before you can go on.
If there's an economic blockade of Taiwan, I think it would be seen as an act of war by the United States. I think it would be seen as an act of war in Europe. But remember, an act of war does not mean that the United States would go to war. The United States, I think, would recognize that it could not change the outcome militarily.
If an economic blockade is seen as an act of war, would the US indeed be ready to act on that?
The Biden administration has repeatedly said that it supports a one China policy. And if the United States says it supports a one China policy, it also means it doesn't support an independent China and an independent Taiwan, because that's not one China policy. So I think in that sense, the repeated assurances by the Biden administration have been positive and constructive. They've been trying to send a strong signal that they are not going to support independence for Taiwan. But at the same time, they've also made it clear that they may be forced to defend Taiwan if China attacks Taiwan. That also they have made clear. And so that creates a kind of a stabilizing factor there.
Right. Because there still is this act between the United States and Taiwan, I think from 1979, the Taiwan Relations Act. That means that if there would be an incident and there would be a kind of an armed response, then the US has to step in, isn't it?
The US actually has a policy of strategic ambiguity. They have not said that they will categorically defend Taiwan if Taiwan is attacked by China, nor have they said categorically that they will not defend Taiwan. And I think this policy of strategic ambiguity has actually worked very well for the United States.
Wat is dat precies, strategic ambiguity?
Het nooit het achterste van je tong laten zien. Nooit een toezegging doen, nooit ook geen toezegging doen. Gewoon in het midden laten hoe je gaat handelen. Dat is eigenlijk strategic ambiguity.
En waarom is dat zo functioneel in dit geval?
Omdat het je tegenstander onmogelijk maakt om een strategie te ontwikkelen. Als die niet kan weten wat je doet. Hè? Nixon heeft het destijds met China ook gedaan. Hè? Dat ze een Amerikaanse strategie was eigenlijk om een soort idioot te zijn. Een onvoorspelbare idioot. Waardoor de Chinezen ook niet wisten waar ze aan toe waren. Het resultaat was de eerste uitnodiging van een Chinees staatshoofd in China, hè, begin jaren 70. Nixon goes to China. Dat was daar het gevolg van.
Maar Amerika heeft, naar aanleiding van dat bezoek van Nixon,
heeft ze wel een act aangenomen waarin Amerika duidelijk belooft aan Taiwan dat ze Taiwan zullen steunen.
Zeker, ja. Maar niet hoe.
En dat is dus een hele slimme diplomatieke move geweest? Of hoe moeten we dat zien?
Ja, dat is een slimme diplomatieke move geweest. Je zal niet zeggen van als jullie aangevallen worden, dan komen we met alles wat we hebben.
Wat betekent die steun dan eigenlijk van het Westen aan Taiwan?
Dat zullen we pas zien als het zover is. En dat is dus ook weer helemaal de bedoeling van die strategic ambiguity.
Taiwan Relations Act says the United States will support Taiwan. It does not say it will go to war. It's very different from NATO. There is no obligation on the United States to go to war. And even if you look at the more conservative or hawkish or people in the United States, very few of them say we should therefore go to war with China. I mean, remember, you're talking about a country with nuclear weapons. That is a very serious proposition. I think most people would say that we should militarily help Taiwan. The United States is already providing Taiwan with a lot of military assistance to try to help them. But I don't think you would end up with World War III.
I just returned from Ukraine 2 days ago. My next stop will be Taiwan. Sir, these people are scared to death. They're scared to death. So can we get you on the record here today, sir, to tell this committee, this Congress, and our nation that we will unequivocally and unapologetically do whatever it takes to have the backs of our friends in Ukraine and our friends in Taiwan. Our friends in Ukraine in the event of Russian aggression, our friends in Taiwan in the event of Chinese aggression.
Absolutely. We stand by our commitments to both countries.
And we will do whatever it takes to defend them.
We will stand by our commitments.
Sir, I can tell you, I just left there. They are scared to death, and they question the commitment of this country. So I will take you at your word that we will do whatever it takes to defend Taiwan and Ukraine.
What do you expect from the West? Will the West come to help Taiwan?
这个协防的内容，老实说我不知道。对啊，就是它可以在实务上面，真的事情发生的时候，它会是怎么样的去应用，怎么样的去解释。但是我真的觉得，就是台湾人应该要先有。对啊，就是要有那个战争的心理准备，我们应该要自己要能够去备战。
You and your friends, what are you fighting for?
这还蛮明显的啊，就是我们的台湾的那个一直都是自由跟民主啊。台湾。中国大家都知道，就是你的网络是不可以，对啊，你的网络它是有高墙的，然后那个是所有一切都是被监控的。在中国生活， 要得到一些资讯是非常困难，甚至可能会被抓，可能会被警察抓。取得，然后还有言论发表的方式什么这些的差异，我跟中国人的很多思考方式会，对啊，我们根本就是不一样的。这就是我那个时候做的 Tank Man。它就是像是是以一个威权政府的状态，然后就是要攻击人民。我是想要去重叠这个意象，就是对啊，就是中国人对啊，就是中共的政权很对啊，就是怎样对待人民。然后再来就是最重要是我是艺术家，我在做创作，然后。就如果今天我想要说一件事情，我想要表达一件事情，我要被政府一关一关的审查，然后然后我要为了要配合一个政权，一直不停的修改我的思考方式，我的表达方式。我觉得这个是对啊，我觉得对艺术家来说，对做创作的人来说，那个是完完全全没有办法接受的事情。
If China decides that it wants to strangle Taiwan, whether it does it through an economic blockade, whether it does it through a military intervention, a limited military intervention, I think that doesn't matter. That we're then in a new world. We are then in a Cold War. Then you would see a real decoupling of trade. And we would enter into, that's why I would call it a Cold War. It would not be a fighting war, but we would end up with two blocks and all the things that go along with it. I think it'd be very difficult to imagine Western countries doing business as usual with a China that had militarily invaded Taiwan.
Het zou betekenen dat een van de voornaamste naoorlogse principes aan erosie onderhevig wordt. En dat is het principe dat handel vrede brengt. Handel brengt vrede omdat je afhankelijk bent van elkaar. En elkaar wat dat betreft gewoon beter met rust kan laten. Tot wederzijds voordeel. Op het moment dat een grote speler in de wereldeconomie zich niet langer aan het principe houdt, worden anderen gedwongen zich er ook niet aan te houden.
China is definitely watching what's unfolding in Ukraine very, very closely. And what the West has hit back at Russia, in terms of canceling its SWIFT status, and the financial sanctions, the economic sanctions, and the sanctions of businesses pulling out of Russia, all that, China will take note. And I'm sure there will be people dedicated to study these cases, case by case, and making sure they understand fully what the impact will be. But the Chinese entanglement with the West, easily 100 times more than Russia. Russia, besides selling energy and having some of the Western exports to Russia, there's no major linkage in the economies. But China, just look at China. Its economy is completely intertwined with the US and Europe. And look at the trade figures. With US annually, it's over $600 billion US dollars. And with Europe, with Germany alone, was 220 some billion euros. And if you look at the two blocks, we're looking at a giant figure of $1 trillion a year trade, and to decouple China out of this giant world supply chain will mean huge cost. Even the pain people feel today about fuel decoupling from Russia will be nothing compared to that type of major operation. So China will be looking at that and look at its own leverage as well. So their calculation is not only what you can take away from me. Yes, China will suffer, but how likely you're going to do that.
Wat je krijgt is een grootscheepse verstoring van invoer, uitvoer, productieketens. Niet alleen omdat er westerse sancties zullen zijn voor wat betreft China, maar ook omdat schepen gewoon niet durven varen of niet kunnen varen. Iedereen komt erachter van, mijn auto heb ik helemaal af, alleen dat ene schroefje, dat zit toch ergens in een container. Ik kan die auto niet afmaken. Dus het is een soort mutual assured destruction, maar dan in economische zin. Hè? Je kan niet zonder elkaar. De grootste chipfabriek ter wereld, TSMC, staat in Taiwan. Dus op het moment dat je die kwijt bent, dan loopt er echt heel erg veel in het honderd. En dan krijg je een flinke economische tegenslag. Dat wordt echt heel groot.
But just imagine, you have to pay 20, 30, 40%, or if not double the price more for your iPhone and iPad. If all these giant companies have to relocate their whole entire supply chain elsewhere, adding to the cost. And thinking about paying 40% or 50% more for your daily consumption, toys, electronics, your shoes, all the new clothes you wear, and will there still be that much consumption in the West if the prices start to go up?
At some level, we like the rhetoric that says, bring it all home. But are we willing to pay? I once saw a wonderful survey in which they asked Americans, would you like American Levi jeans to be made in America? 80% said yes. And then they said, so we've done the calculations. The $40 jeans will cost $80. Are you still willing to pay? 65% said, no, we want the cheaper jean. It's okay for it to be made in China.
In America, they cannot make cars. Okay, they don't have the parts. Okay, they cannot make computers. They don't have the chips. So for many other countries, they'll be in a similar situation. So that we're talking about a tremendous economic crash like in the 1930s. And there wouldn't be no hope of repairing the economy in the short term because everybody needed to build up their own supply chain. So it takes 5 years to build up a simple factory. So this is going to be this has been terrible long grind for the global economy. People have to suffer a lot.
On both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. The issue is that the Chinese are used to suffering. When it comes to suffering, Chinese people are expert at that. So I'm not sure that the Americans who are used to partying all the time, they would be willing to accept something like that.
You think the Chinese people could stomach this, but the West could not stomach this?
I'm afraid so. I think that Chinese people, the Chinese culture, the essence of Chinese culture is something called eat bitterness. Okay, that's for like forever. Is people talk about eat bitterness. Life is about eating bitterness. Life is not about pursuit of happiness. Life is about eating bitterness.
De Amerikanen hebben eigenlijk altijd gedacht dat alle landen uiteindelijk op henzelf zouden gaan lijken. Democratische markteconomie, kapitalistisch. En de verschillen tussen landen die zaten er eigenlijk alleen maar in dat sommige landen gewoon wat minder ver op dat pad waren gevorderd. Want aan het eind van dat pad stond die shining city on the hill. Zoals de Verenigde Staten zichzelf altijd noemen. Daar waar we naar op weg zijn. En wat China doet, is een volkomen afwijkend model. Je hebt een autocratische, kapitalistische samenleving. En dat wijkt af. En dat moeten we nu toegeven. En Mahbubani heeft dat al heel lang gezegd. Hè? Het Chinese model, autocratisch kapitalisme. Ja, hij zegt, het is stabiel. Vergis je niet, het is stabiel. Bereid je er maar op voor. Het feit dat dat automatisme er niet meer is, als het er ooit was trouwens, maar dat zit ver diep in de Amerikaanse psyche, betekent dat je opeens ook de 21e eeuw met zijn machtsstrijd moet gaan beschrijven als een strijd tussen verschillende waardesystemen. En het Chinese waardesysteem is, denk ik, het onze niet. En dat is natuurlijk heel lastig. Hè? Er komt een enorme macht op met, wat met de Oeigoeren gebeurt. Is natuurlijk schandalig. De Chinezen zullen zeggen, hoe lang is het voor jullie geleden, jongens? Hè?
Ja.
Maar dat kenmerkt eigenlijk gewoon de strijd die er is in de 21e eeuw. En Dat hangt er natuurlijk ook vanaf of de grote mondiale instituties die we hebben, van de Verenigde Naties tot Wereldbank tot IMF, de zaak ook een beetje bij elkaar kunnen houden. En dat is nog maar de vraag.
En waarom is dat de vraag?
Nou, je ziet dat China ook hier zich roert en eigenlijk bezig is met de voorzichtige opbouw van een eigen systeem. Van een eigen mondiaal of regionaal beheersingssysteem. Met instituties die heel erg veel lijken op de instituties die we hebben. Hè? Om een klein voorbeeld te noemen. Een van de ergste sancties die je kan opleggen als Westen aan anderen is het loskoppelen van landen van SWIFT. En SWIFT is het interbankaire betalingsverkeernetwerk. China is al lang bezig met het opbouwen van een eigen systeem. Dat heet CIPS. En dat is eigenlijk een soort SWIFT, maar dan Chinees. China is ook bezig met het opbouwen van een eigen wereldbankachtige organisatie. De Asian Infrastructural Investment Bank. Nou, de Amerikanen deden niet mee, de Japanners deden niet mee. Maar het duurde niet lang of de Britten zeiden, nou, laten we het toch maar doen. En toen volgden alle Europeanen. En het slot van dit is dat Nederland een van de founding members is van de Chinese rivaal van de Wereldbank. Dat is eigenlijk best wel gek.
Want daar zie je een verschuiving dus al plaatsvinden.
Nou ja, je bent geen Amerika, je bent geen China. Je kijkt een beetje hoe de hazen lopen. We zijn een handelsland. Dus, en dat geldt voor de andere Europese landen ook. Hoera voor de winnaar. Dus er wordt geschaakt, er wordt gebouwd aan tegelijkertijd deelnemen aan dat bestaande systeem en het ontwikkelen van een alternatief systeem. En dat zou ik, als ik China zou ik dat ook doen. Ik sta aan die kust. En ik kijk en ik zie een IMF waar de heersende wereldmacht, die ik spoedig van de troon zal stoten, gewoon een blokkerende stem heeft.
I think if you see some of the recent movements by China trying to decouple from their side, from the US stock markets by pulling companies back, and already calling for a dual circulation, meaning trying to build up the consumption cycle, economic cycle within the country, and hoard grain and hoard oil reserve. So many of those signs do suggest they're preparing for contingency as well.
For building a new economic bloc in Eurasia.
Without the West. And if we understand correctly, if the ruling class of the Communist Party do want to preserve their rule, then for them, that is an option.
Today, I'm announcing the United States is targeting the main artery of Russia's economy. We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable at U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine.
Ukraine became the precedent set by the West. And, if you choose aggression, you choose force and trying to pursue might is right policy, we move away from you and we'll make sure you can no longer do what you do. And will China look at this and rethink its current move away from the world order, try to set up something else, and make that fateful decision of saying, okay, we try to reintegrate ourselves. Can we find the middle ground? Or will China choose the other road of the fork? That is really what all the major capitals, all the leaders in the world should really start to look closely and think carefully about.